Hey everyone, I'm going to take just a little bit of time here to cover the lesson on sentence combining. All right, so this is an interesting lesson because we have already looked at sentence fragments and run-on sentences and comma splices. And I think it's easy sometimes to get through both of those lessons and think to yourself, oh gosh, the best way to avoid these types of errors is if I just keep my sentences short and to the point. But that's actually not a good way to handle it. We want our sentences to be complex. We don't want simple sentences because hopefully we are not trying to discuss simple ideas. When you reach the college level, you're likely going to be writing about important, more complex things. Therefore, the style of writing needs to match it. Sentence structure needs to match it. So yes, sometimes a short, to the point sentence can be effective, but you don't want to have your writing full of those short, to the point sentences. Again, it just takes away from the elevated nature of your writing. B, it can get very boring and monotonous when it's just a bunch of short, choppy sentences. And it doesn't really help your reader fully understand how all of these ideas are related, which ones are more important, which ones aren't as important. We use different techniques to create longer, more complex sentences. And one way we can do that is through sentence combining. And the whole reason that we end with this lesson is because you really need that foundation, especially with sentence fragments and run-on sentences and comma splices, especially in order to do sentence combining correctly. So let's take a look here at a few groups of sentences to see what so that I can better explain what I mean by, by how combining sentences and creating more complex sentences can help your reader figure out which ideas are most important. We have this group of sentences here, and it's about a movie called The Return of the Hideous Vampire. Out of these three sentences, I want you to think about which one you think is probably the most important. It was produced by Paramount Brothers. It is one of the best horror movies of the last 10 years. It was filmed in Technicolor. Okay, well, it's nice to know that it was produced by Paramount Brothers. Nice to know that it was filmed in Technicolor. But the one piece of information that seems to stand out as being the focus is that it's the best horror movie of the last 10 years. But when we give each of those ideas its own separate sentence, what we're telling the reader is that all three of those things are equally important. But they're not really. If we combine these sentences, then we can perhaps let our reader know which is the most important idea, but at the same time still giving them those two lesser important ideas. We will take a look at how we best do that here in a moment. So let's look at another set of examples. This is about Ernest N. Dugood. Again, which one do you think is the most important fact? He is a Republican. He has announced his candidacy for President of the United States, or he is a senator. Good to know that he's a Republican. Good to know that he's a senator. But what seems to be the focus of this group? The fact that he's announced his candidacy for president. That's a big deal. That's what we want to show our reader is the most important element of these three facts that we've provided. We don't want to just ditch the fact that he's a Republican or ditch the fact that he's a senator. We want to include those two facts, but we want our reader to stay focused on the most important fact, which is that he's announced a candidacy, right? So this is why combining sentences becomes an important endeavor. It shows more complex thinking, but it also shows your reader where they need to focus their attention most, what they need to remember most, because not all ideas are created equal. When we give each idea its own separate sentence, we're basically saying each of these facts are equally important. And then it becomes almost like the way a child would describe something, right? So if you could imagine a child describing, a TV show or a video that they've watched, this might be how a child would describe it right there, right? First, the cowboy woke up, and then he got dressed, and then he went downstairs, and then he got on his horse, and his horse's name was Big Boy, and then he rode off on the horse, and then he fought the bad guy. Well, in a child's world, each of those things probably is equally important. But through an adult lens, we know that that's not true. And we don't want to present our own ideas in that manner because, again, it sounds kind of childlike. And we know better. We know that not every idea is equally important. And our reader knows that too. But if we don't structure things the right way, the reader won't know which ones are the most important. They'll look at that and they'll think, okay, what's most important? That he woke up, that his horse's name was Big Boy, that he rode off on the horse. Seems like the most important thing is probably that he fought the bad guys, but I shouldn't have to guess. I should be able to tell by the way it's structured what is most important. So let's try this instead. After waking up, getting dressed, going downstairs, and getting on his horse, Big Boy, the cowboy rode off to fight the bad guy. So you'll notice how up here, first the cowboy woke up, one sentence, and then he got dressed, two sentences, and then he went downstairs, three sentences, and then he got on his horse, and his horse's name was Big Boy, and he rode off on the horse, and then he fought the bad guy, right? Like 7 separate sentences. When we combined them down here, we didn't combine the full entirety of all 7 sentences. We combined the main ideas from each of the 7 sentences. Right? First, the cowboy woke up. Okay. After waking up, and then he got dressed. Getting dressed, and then he went downstairs. Going downstairs, and then he got on his horse. And his horse's name was Big Boy. And getting on his horse, Big Boy, and then he rode off on the horse. The cowboy rode off, and then he fought the bad guy. To fight the bad guy. Right? We didn't take every single word from this sentence or every single word from this sentence. We just took the main idea and combined all of those ideas into one single grammatically correct sentence. All right? So we have a group of sentences down here. Even not quite as simple as the sentences about the cowboy, but still pretty short, pretty choppy, not necessarily fun to read all in a row. But we have, she was our Latin teacher. We were in high school. She was tiny. She was a bird-like woman. She was swarthy. She had dark eyes. Her eyes were sparkling. Her hair was gray. All right. So our Latin teacher in high school, she was a tiny woman. She was swarthy and bird-like. She had dark sparkling eyes and graying hair. We could get it down to 2 sentences though. When we were in high school, our Latin teacher was a tiny woman. She was swarthy and bird-like with dark sparkling eyes and graying hair. Yeah, we do have 2 things about her eyes, dark and sparkling. But tiny, bird-like, and swarthy all describe her body shape, her body appearance. So why not combine these adjectives all together, just like we combined the 2 adjectives about her eyes? Our high school Latin teacher was a swarthy, tiny, bird-like woman with dark, sparkling eyes and graying hair. So we took all of this and got it down to 1 sentence that's only that long. That's not even a very long sentence, considering we started with 8 sentences. We could easily get those 8 sentences, the ideas from those 8 sentences, into 1 single moderately length sentence. That's our goal. Our goal is not necessarily, it's not just that long sentences are good. It is that a bunch of short, choppy sentences are bad. You don't have to create super long sentences instead of the short, choppy sentences. You just have to combine the ideas into a longer sentence. Doesn't have to be super long, just longer than each of those short, choppy sentences. When you go to do that, you want to keep a few things in mind. Obviously, you want to make sure that the meaning is still correct. Whatever meaning the original set of sentences indicated, that still has to come across clearly in the single sentence that you have now created. Clarity can be understood the first time through, because you're taking different ideas and trying to put them into 1 single sentence. You have to make sure that you have arranged them in a way that it reads clearly the first time through. Coherence. Have you put them together logically? Have you grouped together ideas logically? What about emphasis? You want to make sure, again, that your reader understands the focal point of the sentence. And sometimes you'll put the focal point at the very beginning of the sentence, because people do often remember what they hear or see first. But a lot of the time, we're going to put the focal point at the end of the sentence, because psychology tells us that people definitely remember better what they read or hear last. You don't often want the focal point to be right in the middle of the sentence, because that's the part that the reader might gloss over the most. Not all the time. I won't say that you should never put the focal point in the middle of the sentence, but more than likely, it's more effective to put it either at the beginning or even more so at the end. You also want to make sure that this sentence is concise. And I know that might not make sense, that we want to take 8 sentences and combine the ideas into 1 single sentence, but we don't want to be wordy. We want to be concise. But we do. And just like I showed up here, you're not taking every single word or phrase from each sentence and including it in the combined version. You're only taking the main ideas. So don't get trapped into that idea that you have to take full prepositional phrases from each sentence. You can just take an adjective from the sentence, right? We got tiny, bird-like, and swarthy. We didn't have to keep saying she was tiny, she was bird-like, and she was swarthy. You know, we didn't have to combine the full sentence, just the main idea. And if you can, when you get really good at this, you want to look for a rhythm in how you're combining the sentences, right? You want to make sure that you are, if you have to take information from one of the sentences and turn it into a phrase, you want to make sure that you're placing that phrase in a spot of the sentence where it doesn't like cause this weird interruption or throw off the train of thought or distract, right? You want to make sure that everything is placed where that the sentence will flow. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples here. And again, I'm going to go down to where I've provided the corrections. So we have this group of sentences here. Willie had a beard and mustache. The beard was bushy. The beard was long. The mustache was droopy. Okay, well, that first sentence has two nouns in it, the beard and the mustache. Sentences 2 and 3 are about the beard. Sentence 4 is about the mustache. So why not take the ideas about the beard and just take those adjectives and place them next to the word beard, and then take the one thing about the mustache and put that adjective up by the word mustache. So we end up with Willie had a long bushy beard and a droopy mustache. Same idea here with this one. We have quite a few sentences here. The photograph of the woman brought back memories. The memories were brought back instantly. The woman was beautiful. The woman was young. The photograph was torn. The photograph was faded. The memories were fine. The memories were old. Right? So we have this sentence here that has 3 nouns in it: the photograph, the woman, and memory. Each of these following sentences provides information about one of those nouns. So let's restructure everything and place those adjectives, that information, next to each corresponding noun. So the torn, faded photograph of the beautiful young woman instantly brought back fine old memories. We got all of that into this sentence right there. And it's so much nicer to read it this way. Right? How about this one? The world's first alarm clock woke the sleeper by gently rubbing his feet. The first alarm clock was invented by Leonardo da Vinci. How about the world's first alarm clock, invented by Leonardo da Vinci, awoke the sleeper by gently rubbing his feet? I wanted to focus on the part about the alarm clock waking you up by rubbing your feet, because that seems crazy, right? Maybe someone else is thinking, wow, the fact that Leonardo da Vinci invented the first alarm clock, that's a big deal. So maybe they would structure it a different way. The world's first alarm clock awoke the sleeper by gently rubbing his feet, and it was invented by Leonardo da Vinci. That, you know, it really just depends on what you're wanting the focal point to be, and structure it accordingly. All right, what about the last one? The dishwasher was invented in 1889. The dishwasher was invented by an Indiana housewife. The first dishwasher was driven by a steam engine. That's a really tough one for me, because I honestly do look at all 3 of those sentences and I'm like, wow, 1889. That's huge. An Indiana housewife, that's huge. driven by a steam engine, that's crazy. This is one of those where it's like, I don't know what's most important. So again, depending on the context, you could structure it a few different ways to ensure that the focal point is clear. In this version, we focused on both. We put the steam engine at the front because it's a pretty cool fact, but not necessarily the most important fact. We put that it was invented by an Indiana housewife at the end because that's kind of where we're leaning in terms of what is the most important aspect of these ideas. So, driven by a steam engine, the first dishwasher was invented in 1889 by an Indiana housewife. Again, several ways you could have done that, but I hope you're getting the idea. One thing I want to point out before we end is this. If you're doing what I was trying to show you here in the example, where you look at the information in each sentence, right? And try to group ideas together, it helps avoid the situation where you're actually trying to connect complete sentences here, right? Just like my second example here, I'll type it out so you can see what it actually looks like the way that I said it. The world's first alarm clock awoke the sleeper by gently rubbing his feet, and it was invented by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, this is not incorrect, what I just typed out. That was an acceptable way of combining the ideas in these two sentences, because really all I did was connect them with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that's one of the ways we learned about to correct a run-on sentence or comma splice. When you are first starting to practice sentence combining, it is easy to try to do it in this manner, where you're literally just connecting sentence one and sentence two, instead of just trying to take the main ideas to create something a little different. Your first instinct is to simply connect them. And sometimes that's going to be an okay choice, just like this would have been an okay way to combine these two sentences. The problem, though, is that if you do not have a good understanding of run-on sentences and comma splices, you can easily end up with those errors when you're trying to combine sentences. So you really need to be careful. That's why I like to show these, where we're taking sentences with similar prepositional phrases and just taking those important ideas instead of trying to use so much of the original sentences. Because then it helps alleviate that risk of having run-on sentences and comma splices. So if you are working on combining sentences in your writing and you find yourself doing that, where you just try to connect sentence one to sentence two, stop and look to see if you have created a run-on sentence or comma splice. And if you have, fix that real quick. That way you have correctly combined your sentences. But also work on getting better at combining just the main ideas of the sentences. like we've done here in here. Okay. All right. That's enough there. If you have questions, definitely reach out. Otherwise, you're free to go ahead and move on to the next thing.